Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming to Roll for Healing, Therapeutic Game Master Roundtable. My name is Adam Davis. I'm your moderator today. I'm also one of the founders and executive directors of Game to Grow, who's sort of sponsoring our panel today. So Game to Grow is an organization, a nonprofit organization based in the greater Seattle area, dedicated to the use of games of all kinds for therapeutic, educational, and community growth. So we do all kinds of things under that umbrella. We run therapeutic social skills groups for teenagers. We have some pilot programs out in schools and community organizations to get more kids playing more games. We also provide training and consultation to new people who want to use games in better ways. And we also come across the country to do presentations about the better use of games. So we are a nonprofit, like I said, and we exist. And we are here because of support. So I, as the executive director of a nonprofit, it is one of the things I have to do and say, we would love your support. So if you like what we do and you want us to keep doing it, you can support us in a couple of different ways, but I would love it if you go to gametogrow.org/support. Even switching your Amazon to Amazon Smile would make a big difference to us. So thank you so much for that. Well, before we get started, I want to get a poll of the audience. Raise your hands if you feel like games have improved your life. I was expecting that. So let's go one step farther though. Raise your hand if you think games have helped you get to know yourself better. A lot of hands going up too. Now raise your hand if you think games have helped you interact with other people better. They've helped you be more skillful in your interactions. That is why Game to Grow exists. We believe that games have the power to improve our lives in so many ways, and that we can improve ourselves even more when we play those games focused on getting those benefits from the games, but that the benefits can be even maximized when the game is facilitated by a trained professional. So everybody up here on this panel is a professional who uses or has used games in some way to benefit the lives of other people. So without further ado, I would like to go down the panel here and hear from everybody how they use games, what their training is, and don't forget to say your name.
Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Jared Kilmer. I am a psychologist at the Dallas VA. I'm working in a program called the Psychosocial Rehabilitation and Recovery Center. The PRRC is a mouthful. But what we do there is we work with veterans diagnosed with severe mental illness, which could include depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, PTSD. And I run therapeutic Dungeons and Dragons groups with them, targeting things like social skills, problem-solving skills, ambiguity and frustration tolerance, and perspective taking.
My name is Elizabeth Kilmer. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology and I'm working on finishing up my doctorate. And I run groups at the Children's Advocacy Center in Dallas with children and teens who've experienced trauma, and then also in outpatient substance use treatment at the Dallas VA.
My name is Adam Johns. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the other executive director and founder of Game to Grow. We're both named Adam. And I help run groups that effectively help kids and teens build social skills through the game of Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, I am, better known as Dr. B because it's long, it's Italian, and nobody can pronounce it. But I am aside from being the clinical director of Take This, which is a mental health nonprofit serving the game community, I am also the co-founder of a geeky clinic in Seattle called Save Point Behavioral Health. And while I don't directly run D&D groups anymore, I am the lead training consultant for another Seattle-based program that uses tabletop role-playing to teach social skills. So now I train the trainers, and in fact, I am running a day-long workshop in Seattle for clinicians next week at Antioch University.
Ooh. That's a perfect segue. Yes, please, these are amazing people. That's a perfect segue into the next thing I'm about to say, which is everybody up here has credentials and training. They are professionals. So one thing I don't want anybody to do is mistake this panel for a training for you. So don't leave this panel and go try to do therapy with your friends. Your friends won't appreciate it. You might hurt somebody, so don't do that. If you want training, you heard Dr. B talk about some training opportunities. We have some other training opportunities. Contact us. We'd be happy to talk to you about that, but don't think this is a training. Something else that's important is that we will be telling some stories up here, and just so you know, make sure you know this, everybody who's telling stories up here is changing some demographic information about the stories that they're telling to respect the privacy of the people who are featured in the stories. The only other thing that I'll say before I ask the first question is we often slip into jargon. A lot of academics do this, a lot of therapists do this, educators do this. So I wanted to try something, and that is if we say something you don't understand, put a big T up above your head like this. This is T for terminology. If we were to say something like, I don't know, Dr. B, would you throw out a big academic term for me?
Phenomenological experience.
Perfect, that was great. So we just practiced, trained you to do that. Awesome, thank you. We're not gonna worry about phenomenological experience. Phenomenological experience. I can't even say the word. Phenomenological experience.
It's a big part of what I do.
Fantastic. So the first question is, as RPG therapists, and I'm putting air quotes because this is a brand new emerging field, what outcomes are you looking for? What is the metric of success of RPG-based therapy?
Well, I guess in our groups, what we're looking at the most is we work with a lot of kids and teens who are really socially isolated. So the biggest measure for success really is making friends and hanging out outside of groups. The sort of gold standard in the social skills groups is they've exchanged phone numbers and they set up a time to spend time together, not in the group itself. So more than anything, I think that's one of our biggest measures for success, although there are a lot of other pieces to that I guess the rest of the panelists can kind of talk to.
And similarly, my metric of success is, are the parents happy? Because one of the things that one of my former supervisors told all of us who we were going to work with kids is that while the teen or the child may be your client, the parent is your customer. And you somehow have to work with the client while keeping the customer happy. And if the parents notice a change in behavior, that maybe they're coming out of their room more and actually engaging with the family in a way that the parents are, keen on, that's awesome. Regardless of what other behavior goals we might have, whether it's speaking up without being prompted, whether it's tolerating frustration, whether it's exiting when emotional, if the parents are happy, then that's good.
Yeah, it's at least a good indication we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I run groups with both kiddos and adults, and one of the things that we really focus on is kind of that ability to perspective take. So are you able to look across the table and figure out what your teammate is thinking or feeling? Are you able to figure out and express how your character is feeling in the moment? And one of the ways that we figure out whether or not this is working is by kind of hearing stories about what else is going on in their lives. So I had a client who is in his 70s and has never liked sci-fi or fantasy, only joined the group because he heard maybe it would be a good idea, but wasn't sure about this whole role-playing thing. And after being in the group for a while, came back, and one of his big stories was, hey, I was flipping through the TV the other night, and there was like a sci-fi movie on, and I watched it, and I cared about it. Like, I watched the whole movie because I was able to really connect with the main character, and like, I've never done that before. I'm 70 years old. It's weird to be finding new things that I like. And especially in the population where we're working with substance use, a lot of times if you have a substance abuse issue, that takes over your whole life. Things that you used to care about, things that you used to be engaged with, people that you used to be engaged with kind of disappear in the face of that addiction. And so being able to connect with something new that's not drugs is a really big deal.
And one of the big things I'm looking for in my program is community integration. So a lot of the individuals that I work with severe mental illness are very socially isolated. If they do get out of the house and socialize, it's specifically within the VA, and it's only certain parts of the VA a lot of the time. And so part of what we're doing in our group is helping establish improved self-esteem and teamwork and like belongingness together, and then moving outside of the hospital into the community. So one group I worked with, after several months of meeting at the hospital every week, decided, the psychologist will go with them, but we're gonna meet at the local game store every week and start like expanding their lives outward from the hospital.
That's some fantastic way you guys are bringing people up.
You guys are bringing people together. I turned that off so I could cough. Back out again. You guys are bringing people together with games and helping people take that skill set out into the world. You guys that are here at PAX, do you play games all the time with just people you know, or do you ever play games with strangers? Do you ever go to a game store and play games with strangers, or cons? Raise your hand. I encourage you to use all of the skills you've built by playing games with your friends and sitting down with one of those LFG looking for game cones they have here and meet some new people. You'll see that the common language is so fantastic at bringing people together. Elizabeth, you were reminding me of something as you were saying this. You actually work with both kids and adults. So the next question I was going to ask is, how do they present differently?
Okay.
Working with different demographics, and how do they bring different things to the table, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so I work with adolescents and teens, primarily girls who have experienced criminal child abuse, so severe trauma, and then I work with vets that are primarily male, usually like 60s to 80s. So it's a very different two groups. One of the things, I started working with kids first and then transitioned, and working with kids, one of the things that I did as a game master was I spent a lot of time working in the environment, getting them to kind of rejoin back into a group. So I don't know if you've ever experienced this, if you're playing in a group and some of the people aren't getting along. An easy way to kind of avoid dealing with that is to be like, hey, let's split up, go in two different directions. Then we don't have to talk to each other, it'll be great. So I would pull things in, like maybe they had a divining rod that would help them find 3 pieces of a magical puzzle, but there's one divining rod, right? They have to stick together. So that encourages them, I want them to argue. I want them to be able to talk through conflict. So I expected that to be really similar when I started working with vets, and it wasn't. They don't split up, ever. At all. So that group, the play style just looks a little bit different. Something that is really similar across those groups is really wanting to feel like you are part of a team, wanting to feel like you have a voice, and that voice matters. So that's something where the game can be really powerful, because you have the ability as a player, as a character, to really make a difference in the team and in this world.
Awesome. Jared, you also work with veterans.
Yes.
Could you speak to some of that too?
I don't know.
Exactly. I guess the thing that's so interesting about this is that everybody brings something from their own life into the game. And so I know that, like Adam, the groups that you work with, we see lots of different presenting issues come in. And this is sort of a segue to the next character the next question that I can throw out to everybody. But like, how do people bring their own stuff, and how does that show up in their character creation?
Oh yeah, that is fun. You can't make a character not have some of you end up all over it. These things are wonderful projective tests. And I usually don't tell them what to do. And we very closely follow the 5th edition, like chapter 4 backgrounds and personality, just selecting things that resonate with my players, whether that's I want to make fantasy me, or I want to make the version of me that I want to become when treatment is all over, like my best self, or I want to role play the person I'm afraid to become, or just someone who's absolutely different from me, and I want to understand what that feels like. But whatever is selected, it was selected for usually a very important reason.
I feel like that's really similar kind of across the spectrum, maybe across all ages, although we don't work explicitly with adults. But the idea that you put a lot of yourself into your character, that it's like you said, a projective technique for who you are. Adam and I really believe firmly that you can't make a character without it being a piece of who you are. Even if you make a character and you're designing it off of something you know or a pop culture reference. We had a player once that made a character that was Nicolas Cage. And it was Nicolas Cage across all of his movies, so he would occasionally be chased by bees, or he was a ghost rider often, or he would often make jokes about his face being off. But whatever the references that he made, they were relevant to him, or they were relevant most specifically to the movies he had seen from Nicolas Cage. There's no way for him to really get away from that. He can't reference the stuff he doesn't know. And at some point, he also made a decision. He picked Nicolas Cage over John Travolta. He picked that character for a very specific reason, because it was meaningful to him, maybe because it was funny to him, but all of that ends up coming back through and ends up being a part of the projective technique. And even then, he still learned a lot of stuff. His character still grew. His burning Ghost Rider heart grew a little with each session as he teamed up with his teammates. But that's just true, I think, across the board.
Well, we have a colleague and a dear friend, Summer's Dr. Megan Connell, who runs Psychology at the Table on YouTube. And one of the things that she likes to semi-joke about is, especially if you have mental health training and you look at one person's multiple characters over time, and especially when you look at a DM, you can be like, ooh, I know what's going on with you.
Actually, we do a lot of like self-reflection. This is actually maybe a great thing for you to do as an audience too. Think about the characters you've made over all the campaigns. Think about especially some of the commonalities between some of those characters. How many characters did you make that like didn't have parents? Or they were orphans. We see that all the time. Or how many characters did you make that like are dark and brooding? Or how many characters did you make that are always get along with everybody? Which is my personal issue. Every character I make always like wants to get along with everybody, which is a projective thing. I want to get along with everybody. That's like a thing that exists in my own life that I bring into the game every single time I make a character. And that's not always great. There are times where that hurts me. There are times where that's something that makes my life more difficult because I judge myself harshly based on what other people see. So when I put that into my characters, I'm working through those issues, whether it's intentional from the dungeon master or whether it's just me bringing that into the game that I play.
So, you want to?
I'd like to add one thing to that.
Jump in there.
The first time I ever ran this group, it was in a residential PTSD treatment program. And it was kind of great. I had a very supportive supervisor who thought this was a good idea, but mostly that meant I had a captive audience to try it out on for the first time. Only one of my 8 group members had ever played a role-playing game before. But everyone sat down and they made their characters, and I did the classic, you're all in a tavern beginning. And I drew it out and I explained the tavern to them, and I just said, okay, please place your character somewhere. Tell me like where in the tavern they are and what they're doing. And everybody went around, like, I'm over here, I'm against the wall, I'm sitting at this table. And then the last guy to put his piece down also picked a corner to hang out in. And then he leaned back and he was like, oh, every one of us did exactly the same thing we do in real life, like with our PTSD. We're like isolated, we're against the walls, we're looking around, being hyper-vigilant. And it was kind of awesome to see that insight just blossom naturally.
Yeah, especially from like a top-down view where you like get to see the whole room. You get to like really see what is actually going on from everybody's perspective. That's great.
Yeah.
So once you see that, once you assess, we're talking about character creation and what people bring to the game. How do you work with that? Once they all identify that they're all on the outside of their room, do you then encourage them to make different choices, or do you encourage them to play what their character would play? Tell me more about that. Anybody can answer this. How do you respond once somebody brings something in, you've identified it? What do you do with that? Remembering that this is not a training.
Yeah, so this is like my favorite thing. So I know that we do this a little bit differently. When my players come in, I have them make a character sheet, and one of the things that we really focus on is traits, bonds, like that kind of personality piece. And a lot of the players that I get have pretty negative self-images about themselves. They think that they're not they don't think they're a good person, they don't think they're good at things, they don't think that people like them, they feel really isolated. And so, for example, I had one player who came in, and her character, her trait was that she was angry, and her flaw was that she was depressed. And that says a lot right there about, being angry is okay, that's just part of who I am, but being sad is not. And so then throughout the game, we have the chance to kind of challenge those pieces. So that can come in a couple of different ways. Maybe I set up a scenario in which, if a character says, well, I only look out for myself and I don't take care of anybody else. I set up a scenario where, a kid got kidnapped by goblins, right? There's no reward. You don't get anything out of going and killing the goblins unless you really like killing goblins. And so if that character who says, I only look out for myself, says, no, like, let's go help this kid, I can say, that doesn't seem to be super in line with what your character said. You know, I wonder, is that you acting separately from your character, or is your character maybe a little bit deeper than that? Does your character have a little bit more going on? So usually, I tend to encourage, you can write more about your character. The first thing you wrote on your character sheet may not be what it is.
I think one of the ways that we really love to really utilize the kind of goals and the understanding and the projective technique the characters are putting in is the contrast between saying you versus your character and using that space as a way to work with that. In one of the very early groups that we had, we did a classic tavern start as well. I know it's cliche, but it's also like players who've never seen it before, so it makes sense for it to be cliche. So we had a classic tavern start, and in our games there's no alcohol, so they were all drinking frothy golden soup from mugs. They just go to soup taverns. So in this particular instance, they came into the soup tavern, and this soup tavern had a magical chest they had to put their weapons into in order to not be walking around the soup tavern carrying weapons. And so everybody put their weapons in, and then they walked around the soup tavern. They got soup from Seamus, the soup maven, and they were all sitting around drinking soup, and then all of a sudden the tavern was attacked by skeletons who burst from the floor and burst from the walls. And we went around to each player and asked them, what do you do in response to this? You don't have your weapons. And some of them picked up chairs and hit the skeletons with chairs or cast magic spells. And we got around to one player, and this player held up his arms like this. And he said, I summon my weapons to myself. And he had designed his character with runic tattoos on the inside of his arms. But this was the very first day of play, and I actually didn't know about the design. And so I said, they don't come to you, they're sealed in a magical chest. And then he clenched his fists, and he started to get really red in the face, and he started speaking short sentences and say, if I can't summon my weapons to myself, then what am I going to do? My character's completely worthless. I can't do anything with him. And Adam, who was helping me DM at the time, turned to him and he said, yeah, your character can't summon his weapons to himself. He's really angry. What does he do next? And in that moment, he got to let go of it. And we saw him unclench his fists, and the color came back into his face, and he said, he grabs the arms off the skeleton and he hits him with his own arms. And I said, yes, that's exactly what you do. You rip the arms off the skeleton and hit him with his own arms. And we knew in that moment we could play with that space. He can take the frustration or the anger or the challenges that he's having, and then he doesn't have to own them. They don't need to be a part of who he is or how he's dealing with them. He can put them onto his character instead. And you'll notice as I tell that story, Adam says he, and the player says he, but in the moment of success, it's not him, it's the player. He gets to own the success of overcoming that, even if he didn't have to own the challenge.
Aside from the fact that I've heard that story now a gajillion times.
That might be the best way.
No, I love that story every time. Every time I hear frothy golden soup, I'm like, yeah. Beat that skeleton. I take a slightly different approach, partially because the way I work with our program, it's not therapy in our program, it's all social skills. So it's very behaviorally based. We need outward things. So when we work with our kids to build characters, I work with the kids, or now our trainers work with the kids, I work with the trainers now, to find one goal. Like, what's something you as a person would like to be better at? And how can we incorporate that into your character? And what's really cool is seeing when they start to externalize that in this, they take these skills in this safe environment where there's really no, if you fail, okay, great, you had a bad roll. We all have a good laugh. Resurrection spells are plentiful. It's fine. You can start over. But when they start externalizing that to their outside life by practicing it as a character, we had one kid I remember who was almost nonverbal. He was the diplomat. No one saw it coming, but within the safety of the game space, within the framework he understood, I was impressed. I mean, I got a silver tongue on me, but my God, what this kid was coming up with. We were like, oh, okay, we're throwing that adventure out because this kid just took it in a very different direction. And at one point, he wanted to Maximoff an entire dwarven mafia because we forgot he had a wish spell. My co-facilitator had 12 pages. First of all, I warned him against that, but he had like 12 pages of plot laid out, and he said, I wish there was no more dwarven mafia. And we're just looking at each other like, okay, well. But one of the things that I think many of us use for this is to externalize it into the outside world are check-in questions. And I know you two, Adam and Adam, use check-out questions as well. And that becomes this overt space to say, how do we take the skills our characters learned today and make them our own skills? So that's, so I guess in my circumlocucious way of doing things, I start with the character creation, work with them on that, work on a skill, and then use those check-in questions to help externalize those skills outside the group. There we go.
I will say, obviously, we use check-in questions and check-out questions as a therapeutic technique, as a way to reflect on both yourself and your character, as a way to take the pieces that you're learning from within the game and the therapeutic pieces outside of the game. But frankly, I think everybody should have check-out questions and check-in questions in their DMing.
I've started using it in my personal groups, and they love it.
Groups. It's so good. It's so much better to like get feedback from players. As a dungeon master, it's always good to ask for feedback. Players don't always want to give you feedback, but you're never going to get better as a dungeon master. You're never going to know whether or not you're playing the kind of game your players want to play unless you ask for some of that feedback from them.
What check-in questions do you ask, Adam? Let's give the tools.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So we ask a lot of check-in questions that are all about thinking about yourself and thinking about your character. So sometimes those are simple check-in questions. Sometimes we'll say, what is your favorite ice cream? What's your character's favorite ice cream? It's a chance to think about how is your character different from you? Are you the same? Maybe you both love chocolate ice cream. Are you different? Maybe you love chocolate ice cream and your character loves bug ice cream because they want to be off the wall and wacky. It tells you something about your character, and it gives you a chance to continue to deepen the personality of your character. We play all these D&D characters, and like, do you ever think about like, what does your character do while they're just like sort of sitting around and they're bored and they gotta kill an hour? Like, do they read?
What do they do during their long rest?
Yeah, what do they do during the long rest?
That's actually a really good check-in question right there.
A long rest is 8 hours. What are they doing for it? Do they just sleep for 8 hours? They literally like, all right, it's a long rest. I'm out. I'm not taking a watch. Like those things are like interesting questions, and those deepen the personality of the character. I'm not defined by literally the only time I'm sitting up on stage. I like go do stuff. I have things in my life. Those are the things that define me as a personality.
Some of my favorite check-in questions are, what advice would you give your character, or would your character give you? That one, you get a ton of those, and you can ask that one again and again. Or like, what did your character think went well today? Or what do you think went well today? Those are some things.
One of my favorites is, what did your character learn during this session? And what did you learn? Which sometimes is the same and sometimes different. It's usually I learned not to run into rooms or I'll catch on fire.
Or get struck by lightning.
Good.
Well, one I really like, and this is one I like to ask in the first 1 or 2 sessions when I'm playing with a new group, and this is exclusively for the players themselves. The purpose of this question is to help everybody gauge what the other people in the group are looking for, and me as a DM as well. The question is, what do you as a player consider success in D&D? And based on all of the answers, we now get to adjust the game, and everybody else is now looking out for other people, and hope, ideally it creates more cohesion and all of that. But it's often a question. Has anybody ever been asked that question before? What do you consider success in D&D? Okay, like 3 of you. But it's such a simple question.
Yeah.
Why aren't we asking that more?
And like everybody's approach to D&D and to RPGs is so different. It's like some people want combat and killing stuff, and
right,
and some people want epic moments, which is similar but not the same.
Well, and one might be narrative driven, one might be a triumph over adversity, but we don't know unless we ask. And it's shocking to me how few of us have ever been asked that question.
The last time I asked that question, they just wanted to be in the woods more.
just hang out in the woods.
How many of you are game masters in the audience? Awesome. So now you have a new skill you can use that's not therapeutic. You can just get some feedback from your players. It'll make your game more inclusive and more conducive to everybody having a good time. Raffael, or Dr. B, you were saying something that I was particularly appreciative of, because we totally stole that from you. So I wanted to totally give everyone advice. Chris Perkins used to say this all the time. Good game masters steal from other things that they like, and good therapeutic game masters steal from each other all the time. This is a brand new field, and we're all communicating and sharing ideas in such a fantastic way. We're totally building this field up from largely nothing. So my next question is, because this field has come from largely obscurity, where we're still dealing with the remnants of the satanic panic, how do you, this still happens, how do you deal with doubt? That either comes from an institution you're trying to work with, that comes from a parent, that comes from a practitioner, maybe a player who has that doubt, or even, this does happen, and Dr. B, you did a great panel about this at a previous PAX, about self-doubt. That we sometimes, as professional game masters, have a little bit of self-doubt too. So I'm curious, how do you overcome doubt? You guys are telling fantastic stories. I'm sure nobody in the audience doubts anything. But how do you deal with doubters?
I like to respond to people with optimistic enthusiasm at every turn. So we're in Seattle. Seattle's a very progressive place when it comes to stuff like satanic panic. So we don't face a lot of that where we're located, but we travel around a lot, and we do talk to a lot of people, and very occasionally we'll get somebody who, when we say Dungeons and Dragons, they go, "Oh, the devil stuff." And my usual response to this is, I want to respond with as much positive enthusiasm to their negativity as I possibly can. So when someone goes like, "Isn't that the game that you play in basements and stuff?" And I'll go, "Sometimes people see it that way, yeah. Thank you so much, but really, actually, it's a game that is just so social, and it's such a great opportunity. I would love to give you an example of what it looks like. You're kind of at a table with a lot of other people really working together. There's no computer screens. It's such an amazingly positive and social and collaborative experience. And that positivity really reflects back well to those experiences. Nobody wants to shut you down from that level of positivity. We actually, Adam and I did a homeschool fair, and we had this player, this prospective client who had come to our table and clearly was a great fit for our table, having a lot of trouble figuring out how to fit in, finding the people that they connect well with. They told us that they were really struggling making friends, and they said their mom never would let them come to our groups. And we said, well, bring them over, we'll talk with them and tell them all about what we do, and maybe they can do that. And homeschool fairs are often a wide divide between sometimes very religiously entrenched individuals and families, and sometimes very open-ended and welcoming ideas. And so at the very end of the homeschool fair, the parent came over and just started talking to us about how their sibling was corrupted by the devil using Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s. And we're just sitting there smiling the whole time. And then she says, "No offense, but I don't know you from Adam." And Adam and I are both wearing name tags that just say Adam, and both of us just reach over and point to our name tags, and she just goes, "You know that."
I like to use citations. This is partially just because I like research. I like researching this stuff, but I think it's helpful for people to get facts. And there was a Canadian survey done I'm doing it already. There was a Canadian survey done of psychiatrists a couple years ago, and it was shocking to me to find out that 1 in 5 Canadian psychiatrists still associated Dungeons and Dragons with psychopathology, so mental illness. And I love being able to say what we're doing is not something we're making up, well, a little bit, but in the moment, yeah, no, I mean, it's collaborative storytelling, but it's not unprecedented. I mean, there's been stuff done like role-playing has been a cornerstone of psychology for over 100 years. There's, I've got one study on my computer, I've got this whole file I'm building on this stuff. One study from the 60s on smoking cessation using role-playing. You go even further back than that, guys like Jacob Moreno, who, drama, there you go. The role-playing has been a thing. And so all we're doing is we're taking our knowledge of psychology and we're fitting it over that. And we're doing well-researched interventions. We just happen to be using dice. And being able to explain that in an articulate and clear way, and by yes, I am a doctor, parents, it seems to work a lot of the time.
Demystifying what the game is and what the therapy is probably the most important thing. Just want to make sure everyone's on the same field when we're talking. I've had to be very defensive moving through the VA, selling what I'm doing. A lot of psychologists, not all of us, but a lot of us get training through the VA, and one of the big pushes in the VA is evidence-based treatments. If there isn't a huge body of research behind it, proving that it is valid and helpful, it's probably a waste of time or resources. And I mean, that hasn't always been the case. Our best research stuff wasn't researched at one time. But what I've had to do is a lot of in-servicing for like the teams I work with or the administrators for like theoretically why would this be valid. But I still don't think that's good enough. The first time I ever met the Adams, I ran up to them, I was like, well, what about the research? Do you have any data? I want to prove it.
We said no.
Actually, let's chat. I really do have a growing file on this.
That's great.
Good. But I'm glad they said no, because it scared me, because I was so excited about what they were doing. So part of that defensiveness is, as I've gone through the VA, when I have the opportunity collecting pilot data, I've done this over several different sites over several years, and like, I can now point at numbers to say, creativity goes up, self-esteem goes up, forgiveness of self and others increases, problem-solving skills, social skills. This is all self-report, but you can see very clear changes just from 8 weeks of intervention. A lot of times these groups last longer, and those growth points just get bigger and bigger.
So, unless you wanted to throw something in there, Elizabeth. The responding to doubt is oftentimes, you're using like data. You're responding and speaking the language they want to hear oftentimes. I want to flip the script a little bit, and I want to hear a time that you had no longer had any personal doubt. You knew for a fact this was effective. When Adam and I first came to PAX South in 2016, someone in the Q&A said, what was an aha moment when you knew this work was effective? So I'm gonna echo that back to you guys. What is a moment where you knew there was no more need to convince somebody based on, the language that they need to speak? You were in the room and you knew this was effective. Thinking faces.
Okay,
there's so many stories.
I got one, and give you guys time to think about it. Oftentimes, especially with the social skills group I work with a lot of autism. And the perspective taking is often a challenge for folks on the autism spectrum. We had one player who, despite all the coaching to make their characters a little different than they are, it made them. And it was a total Mary Sue on top of it. And this player took everything personally, despite the fact that both my co-facilitator and I were like, listen, if you've never played before and you're gonna be this emotionally invested, don't make a paladin. Everyone will hate you. Everybody hates paladins? You'll find out. For the best of reasons, you'll find out. And so this player took this personally for like 3 weeks, because we also had in that group the one evil character we've ever allowed. It was a lawful evil paladin that propelled the group forward by being a bit of an antagonist. They butt heads all the time. And there were tears from this new player because they couldn't separate themselves out from that character. Until one day, they got into a screaming, hurling insult match across the table with the evil paladin that involved kicking the chair out from under them, screaming near obscenities, because we keep it PG-13, And after a couple minutes, my co-facilitator and I were like, oh, we gotta see where this goes. And we just gotta see how this plays out. And they couldn't keep it up for too long because they just started laughing together. And they were friends after that. And we knew in that moment, boom, that player got it. You can pretend to be someone else and practice new things without taking it personally. And in that moment, I knew.
So, I think I'm different from everyone else at this panel because I have no problem letting my players play evil characters. I think that it's really interesting. I think we get to challenge it a whole lot. Oh yeah, I love it. It's my favorite thing.
What?
Yeah. I think it's great because usually my players have this idea that they are like terrible, horrible people, right? If I say, oh no, but your character can't, like you don't get to write your character as awful as you think you are, like I'm already kind of taking some of that control and some of that identity away from them. But I've also never had a character who has effectively played a chaotic evil character. Like, that's really, like, I can't imagine as a player trying to keep that up. It sounds exhausting and really hard to do anything with anyone. So I had a player who came in, everybody hates me, the world is terrible, I'm a terrible person. I'm not gonna get along with this group, nobody likes me, I'm bullied a whole lot. And I was like, cool, let's see what happens. Her character, her backstory was that she wanted to destroy the world. Her parents had been abusive and so she killed them. So that's kind of where we're starting. She says she's chaotic evil. I was like, okay. Doesn't have a character name, like is not willing to name this character at all. So we kind of move forward and we start playing very first interaction with an NPC. I kind of set it up and I give them kind of this nugget that this NPC maybe has some information that they need. So she says, I walk up to the NPC and I say, tell us what we want to know or I will kill you. First words of the game. And that NPC says, well, I don't want to talk to you at all, because, even if I did, like, you've already told me you're going to kill me, why should I trust it if I tell you the information you want to know that you're not going to kill me? The rest of the group responds pretty negatively pretty quickly. They're like, why would you do this? We really need to talk to this guy. Like, this is not working. So they say, okay, can we offer to buy you dinner? And we're going to take you into this other room and talk to you there. And so this player gets kind of reasonably upset. I think she thought that the promise of murder would be effective, and it wasn't. And she also recognized that now the whole group of people that she met today is already mad at her. So they start to walk in, and they're like, okay, let's all go in together. We're going to talk to this guy. We're going to be nice. We're not going to threaten to kill him anymore. And she says, well, I'm not going in. Like, I'll just stay out here because I ruin everything anyway. And most of the table kind of give her these looks like, great, now you're being dramatic on top of threatening to murder people. And I was able to kind of reframe in that moment. I said, it sounds like what you're saying is you really care about this group succeeding, but you're worried that your character might get angry and upset and threaten to kill him again. So in trying to help the group succeed, you want to sit outside. And she said, yeah, of course that's what I'm saying. So that's kind of where we started with this group. And through our group lasted 9 weeks. And so kind of by the end of the 9 weeks, I was really able to see this character and this player change. She became a real leader in the group. She had a lot of fantasy knowledge that she was able to bring in. She had ideas about spells and about problem solving, and was able to kind of shift and start saying what she intended instead of just kind of pulling back. And part of that was the group listened. And where I really, really knew that it worked was one day she came back in and she said, I know that we're not really talking about our lives outside of this in here, but like this is really important and I want to say something about it. I said, yeah, sure. She said, I was getting bullied at school this week because I have a stutter. And I walked up to the bully and I told her calmly and nicely why it wasn't okay to make fun of people just because they're different. And in my head, I'm like, this is great, and there's no way that it went well. But it did. Apparently, the bully actually backed down and apologized. And that was a moment where I was like, okay, it's done. This worked.
I love that. That's spectacular.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, and she's now a chaotic neutral character. There was like within three sessions, I was like, I know your character says it's chaotic evil, but like that really didn't line up. Like, is that because you messed up kind of how you were playing, or is your character maybe different? She's like, maybe my character doesn't want to destroy the world.
Okay, so we went from the Joker to Jack Sparrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I like evil characters.
I think, honestly, I think one of my favorite success stories was a pretty recent one. We had a player that had been in our groups for a long time. Our groups, one of the things that makes us so successful as a therapeutic intervention is that our players want to come back quarter after quarter. They want to come back time after time. We have something like a 90% retention rate, which is unheard of in any kind of group therapy setting. We have one player that came to our groups because they were really struggling to make friends, they were really struggling to interact with other people, and they would do things in our session like get up during the check-in and kick other players, like not hard, but like in the chair or something like that, to basically like inform them that they were unhappy with the response they gave to a check-in question, which is maybe not the best way to build friendships. But over the course of the groups, they've now been with us for a couple of years. And just more recently, the player, totally unprompted, turned to me right before the group started and said, I love this group, I'm so glad that we're back from break. This place is my third place. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, the first place is my home and the second place is my work, which for me isn't a place. I don't work. And the third place is here. This is the place where I belong, and this is the place where I really care about being. And it was just such a beautiful moment. It was just such a wonderful place that this client who really had never belonged and still is homeschooled, so doesn't get a lot of social input and social interaction. But this is the thing they want to come to, and they've never missed a session. It's really, truly meaningful to me.
Trying to think which story I want to tell.
Oh, can you tell, actually, you told a leadership story?
Oh yeah, tell the leadership.
Okay. That one was great.
There is one member of my current role-playing group who, my program that I work in it's kind of like junior college. You have to take a minimum of so many groups every week to stay in attendance, but you just select a bunch of different courses and you go for like a semester or 4 months. And the role-playing group is one of them. And I don't know if you guys have ever gone through college, but there's lots of days you just don't feel like going. And so sometimes people skip, they miss a day. She was always deliberate, I don't miss a day. I always gotta come to this group. It's like kind of the highlight of the week, getting to connect with everybody else. But other people, they still miss a day here and there, and I really like it when we're short a couple of players. There's some drawbacks to that. Everyone's presence really changes it for everybody else, but people's absences change things too. When a group is reduced to a small number, like 2 or 3 people, the spotlight shifts. And this particular player was one of the 2 people that showed up that day. It was a real small showing. And for the first time in her participation in the group, like, things weren't progressing the way they normally would because the people that are normally taking leadership roles weren't around. So she got to kind of take charge and say, like, I think we should do this, I think we should do that. And it was consistently reinforced by the other player who was there. He's like, these are really good ideas. Like, why aren't you in charge more often? I want to follow these, like, these are great. And then more players came back the next week, and she was still kind of in that role, and she got more feedback reinforcing that she might have leadership skills that she didn't realize were there. And the following week she comes back and she said, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I don't like my job, I'm unhappy in it, it's not really going anywhere. I just realized I have all these leadership skills, and can you help me fill out some applications? I want to move up. It was really cool.
The idea for this panel came because years ago, Adam and I were at our office on a video chat with Jack Birkenstock, who works with the Boccamazzo, who's an organization on the East Coast that does similar work. And we spent like 2 hours just sharing stories about the exciting work we were doing. And I had dinner with Jared and Elizabeth last night, and we just spent like 3 hours like sharing stories and getting so excited. So I love the number of stories that we get to share with the audience. It's so fantastic. We're about to transition into Q&A, which will be right over there. If you have questions for this panel of therapeutic game masters, you can form a line right there in front of that standing mic. If you are someone who wants more training, you can just go ahead and stand up and do that now. If you're someone who wants training in this kind of field, Dr. B, where can they find more information about that training you're doing in Seattle, just in case?
Well, I will be tweeting about it this week for sure, so you can follow me on my tweets. But you can also go to Antioch University, Seattle, and you should be able to find some information about that. It's going to be so fun. I'm actually taking 5 clinicians and grad students who have never played D&D. And one of them is my former professor. And we're going to take them through the paces. We're actually scheduling session 0 this week.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Adam and I are doing a webinar training this coming Friday. You can find more information about that at our website, gametogrow.org. Before we get started with questions, one quick reminder that questions generally take the form of an upward inflection. There's oftentimes an inquisitive, information you want back. If you have stories you want to share with us, save those for later so we can make sure we respect everybody's time. Let's start with the first question.
Hi. Yes. My question is, it seems like you use role play to help your patients or clients deal with trauma or PTSD, that sort of thing. How do you handle it when a patient uses role play or gaming in general as an avoidance mechanism or a way to escape facing their personal issues?
That's an awesome question.
How do you deal with somebody who uses the game as escape?
Well, all behaviors form some kind of a function. And it doesn't mean that they're only serving one function every time you use them. Like, substance use, for example. We work in substance use. Sometimes it functions as a way to avoid. Sometimes it functions as a cure for boredom or a way to celebrate. The reason somebody is using something varies from context to context. So the first thing I want to do with my player who is using role-playing as avoidance is working on building insight and identifying that maybe sometimes this isn't just for pleasure in a structured way, but is it ever getting out of hand? And if it's being used for avoidance, what is being avoided? Is what's being avoided, does that deserve time scheduled in to sit and process and work through? And if so, how can we work on that in individual therapy so that that's something that can be tackled and not need to be avoided anymore?
I'll also say there's something to role-playing games that make it more difficult for it to be an avoidance of things that don't also introduce good things into your life. Because it's a social game and because you're often sitting down with people in person for it and often interacting in these role-playing ways, it means that if you're using it for avoidance and for other things in your life, you're still getting a lot of social support and a lot of positivity that you get from that experience. There certainly are other games that you can use as a greater avoidance factor or for lack of a better term, a worse way to avoid stuff than something like Dungeons and Dragons.
And just my anecdotal experience is it usually goes the opposite direction. One of my offices is literally Microsoft country in Seattle, and a lot of the parents are concerned with video game addiction. And there's evidence to support the idea that interactive media is a great form of mood repair, but it can get taken too far sometimes by some of the kids. And so speaking to what Dr. Kilmer said, is that we look at what they're looking for in terms of why they're playing video games, and we find a substitute behavior. Because anybody ever see that Mad TV episode where Bob Newhart's is like, stop it! Okay, search that, it's so funny.
If you're interested in any way in therapy, it's pretty hilarious.
It's so funny. But it's so hard to tell people just to stop it. What's better is give them a substitute behavior. And if you can find something that is both fun and helps them fulfill that role that they're looking for, and also might introduce a few other things like pro-social skills, then, And so personally, I can't speak for everyone, I have really not experienced any one of my players using D&D as an avoidance strategy. An engagement strategy, sure, but not avoidant.
Thank you very much.
Hi, you were talking about how oftentimes you have characters that will make negative character choices. Do you ever make them stick to their guns, and even when it's kind of difficult to do that, to maybe feel the punishment, or do you almost always want them to grow from those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It depends on the character, and it depends on kind of what the goals are. So having consequences, I think, is really important, right? If you hurt someone's feelings, you have to figure out how to deal with and repair that relationship kind of on your own to some extent. And so I don't ever take away, if you made a poor choice in a game or your character made a poor choice in a game, you walk through a door and then you get struck by lightning and you're like, oh, just kidding, I didn't want to do that. No, you're still struck by lightning. But I will allow characters and players to kind of change things moving forward. But I think consequences in a safe space are generally pretty important. Consequences for the sake of consequences are dumb, but if they're serving a purpose, it's important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. So since everybody at your tables all has different needs and all that, how do you keep all of that in mind when you're sitting down and planning your next session?
Oh God,
That's a good thing.
well, that's actually one of the questions that is one of the answers to, hey, I should be a therapeutic DM. I'm like, let me explain how complicated this is. Let me really explain how complicated this is. Are you good at improv with 6 needs at once? And can you change it on a dime?
I'll say, so there's some crossover for things that are good for everybody at the table. Because the groups that we run are social skills groups. So this is, you guys can speak a little bit more to the common factors idea, I think. But functionally, in social skills groups, there's a lot of things that are very common across everybody in the group as far as challenges that they have. So there are some puzzles and challenges that we can make where we can generally assume, because it's a social skills group, everybody's going to have challenge with this, and then we just have to scaffold their level of challenge for each individual. A great example of this is we sometimes do a challenge where there is one player, the characters all walk into a room, and there is a goblin ghost in the room. And as soon as the characters walk in, the door behind them disappears, and there doesn't appear to be any other door out of the room. And the goblin ghost knows the password to get the doors to reappear, except there's only one player at the table who can see and hear and talk with the goblin ghost. So now all of a sudden that character is the one who has to sort of translate everything back and forth between the goblin ghost and the rest of the players. And we often use this as a technique specifically for a player who is more quiet, who's more reserved, who's having trouble speaking up and taking up space, and that's a targeted technique. But everybody else at the table now also has to figure out how to have their interactions in a very different way, where they can't interact directly with the dungeon master, and instead they're having to interact with this other player at the table. So while it's a targeted technique at one individual, it also serves the whole group at being able to build new skills and new forms of interaction, both with each other as individuals and new skills that they can use at the table later.
Can I actually just jump on that? Another thing to think about is the potential for what's called homogenizing. Basically, you can try and curate your group in such a way that their needs have overlap. It would be really hard to do, I've done this, a group therapy with one person who has chronic self-harm and one person who has schizophrenia and has some very bizarre hallucinations, and one who just has anxiety. And it's really hard to meet all their needs. But if you're all doing a social skills group and all of its variants of social skills, or you're doing an anxiety group and it's just variants of anxiety, it gets a lot easier.
So we are almost out of time, so I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, I'll go fast. I'm a high school teacher, and I'm the D&D club is brand new, and I'm finding that I've got a lot of nuclear players who show up every week on Friday, so they're committed. And then I've got some like satellite players that pop in like once a month, once every couple of weeks. I don't know, it's very segmented and kind of chaotic. And I have like teacher ideas, but I'm very new to the D&D world, so advice?
So one thing that I've used to kind of reinforce attendance is leveling up based on your attendance. So, and that can potentially backfire if you have now everyone is level 7 and this one person is level 1 and they thought maybe they wanted to try it out, but now it sucks. But something like that. And then I think that having people pop in and out can be really interesting. I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that, as long as everybody else at the table still feels respected.
Yeah, what I'm running into is that there's like, we've got the nuclear campaign going on, and then the other people who have no idea what's going on, and we only have an hour and a half, unless it's 3 hours because it's Good Friday, and it's just figuring out how to get all those moving pieces.
The other thing I'll say is that we do consultations, Game to Grow does consultations, and I mentioned earlier some of the new initiatives we have. We're partnering with Ethan Schoonover, who runs the Lake Washington Middle School for Girls D&D Club, and he would love to help you share any resources that he has too.
Even if I'm in Texas.
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
we have the internet. The world is ours. Last question, let's do it.
So this pertains to the concept of evil characters, and in general, the concept of like alignment. When people create characters, specifically evil characters, you mentioned that they incorporate a bit of themselves into the character. So what might the incorporation of, say, like an evil alignment say in the most general manner about that individual? In addition, how do you incorporate the consequences for alignment? Like, I'm speaking as a DM here, because it seems to me that alignment seems really fickle and at best a background, and at worst something that can change basically on a dime.
Can you answer the question?
I can answer it super quickly. Oh, I don't even. Okay, so I don't punish or have consequences for alignment. I have consequences for actions. So that's how you do that. Don't psychoanalyze your friends, but I would say that generally evil alignment often means the person thinks that they're a bad person, or they don't have a lot to bring to the table, or that they're isolated.
But if you talk to us after the panel, we can give even more advice on that.
Yeah.
So after this panel is over, we will all be outside, right out there. We can answer some more questions. Reach out to every single one of us all over the internet. The magic of the internet is we can actually asymmetrically communicate. So please follow people on Twitter, send us emails, meet us outside. Adam and I also, Game to Grow has a booth down in the expo hall with Table Titans, so come, we'll be there all day tomorrow as well. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.